perfectly qualified person to look into some of these numbers is the ABC's election analyst, Anthony Green, who is in our Sydney studio. And Anthony, first of all, an overall observation from you. What do you find most fascinating about some of the figures, if not the headline figure itself?
Well, I mean, I think the pattern is, as a political scientist, there's some interesting political geography in the overall results. And they all relate to Western Sydney, which I'll come back to. But I think we've got some graphics of the overall figures to do first.
Yeah, so let's go to that first of all. The overall percentage, we know that the kind of headline figure, but talk us through that as we look at those numbers now, yes and no.
Okay, well, I'll talk through these. I'll just give you a warning that I can't actually see them, so I'll just talk through them. The overall figure on a 79.5% turnout is 61.6% yes. If you break that down by state, it's been a yes in every state and territory. The lowest state is New South Wales at 57.8. The strongest vote was in Victoria, 64.9. The ACT, 74%. There's some interesting figures in the participation is not as markedly different as expected. Male and females, males were 77.3 participating, females 81.6. And the age participation, the youngest age groups 18 to 24 were at 74%, and that rose to 88% for people over the age of 65. So as you would normally expect in the voluntary vote, the age turnout increased with age, but there's nothing there that would significantly indicate that this turnout rate has actually affected the results. The figure is a solid 61.6. I've done some breakdown by who holds the electorate and where the electorate is. I just have to put my glasses on to see my notes. But in Labor seats, the overall figure was 61.7 yes. In Liberal seats, 63.3. National seats, 56.8, and LNP seats in Queensland, 59.8. Inner city seats were 67%. Outer suburban seats, 58%. That's heavily influenced by the result in Sydney. Regional seats, 64. Rural seats, 62. And it is, to me, the most interesting thing is this pattern in Western Sydney. As a political scientist, Australia's party system is still dominated by the echoes of class. We still have a party which talks about being workers and party of business. We still have a party system that looks like that. There are many conservatives who would like to break that mould and make it more about morals and change it in much more. American politics is also divided by attitudes and values as much as by class. And in this, what you've seen here is there's 12 seats in Sydney which voted no. 9 of them Labor seats, 3 of them Liberal seats. The Liberal seats were Banks, Mitchell and Bennelong. But Labor seats like Blaxland, held by Jason Clare, Watson by Tony Burke, McMahon by Chris Bowen, 3 very senior front benchers, all were 35% or under yes votes.
Is that unique to Sydney on your analysis so far, Anthony Green? Did you see pockets like that in Labor-held seats in other outer metropolitan areas outside of Sydney?
It's not necessarily out of the metropolitan. The same pattern is in Melbourne. There are 2 seats that voted no in Melbourne. They are Cornwall and Bruce, and they are 2 of the highest populations of non-English speaking born migrants live in those electorates.
So you think that's the common trend between those Sydney seats and these Melbourne seats?
It's the same. All of those Western seats have large portions of their population are born in non-English speaking countries. Gay marriage doesn't fit into the Australian political structure very well because it's not a class-based issue. It cuts across party lines, which is why the parties themselves have struggled to deal with the issue in recent years. But it has been a constant for 30 or 40 years in Australian politics, these so-called conscience issues. But people who come from a different political culture haven't grown up in our system where this issue is debated. And so when you bring up an issue like gay marriage, it runs across other cultural and religious lines. And I think that's what you're seeing in those Western Sydney results. I understand there's been some quite specific campaigning within the Muslim community, the Chinese community, in parts of Western Sydney, and that's sort of something that goes under the radar. It's often not in English, it's not in the mainstream media, so some of those things may be showing through in the results. But as a political scientist, does that indicate some sort of cleavage, some sort of change in political voting patterns? I don't think so. I mean, Blaxland, Watson and McMahon are suddenly not going to be winnable for the Liberal Party because of these sorts of issues.
Sure. Nevertheless, let's broaden it back out to something we've already flashed up, but I'll get you to talk us through the state percentages again, Anthony. You touched on them briefly before, but we will show our audience on screen some of the more detailed numbers which you rattled off earlier. One that stands out to my mind is Western Australia, surprisingly strong at almost 64% yes, almost leading the pack there. How does that fit in with our conventional understanding about party political views, if nothing else, in Western Australia? Does that surprise you, I suppose, is my question?
Yes and no. It has a much lower proportion. I mean, the fact that New South Wales was so low, people are surprised by, but New South Wales also has by far the highest proportion of people born in non-English speaking countries. So in other words, there are other political, cultural issues there in the mix, in the debate in politics in New South Wales. And Western Australia does not have, it has a large migrant population, but it draws people a lot more from England and from South Africa than most other states do, particularly from England. There's a high English migrant population in Western Australia. So it doesn't surprise me. Curtin, which is 70% yes, was the highest in Western Australia. That's Julie Bishop's seat.
Yeah.
The lowest was O'Connor, 56. Just looking around some of the other states, you see the same sort of pattern. There are 3 rural seats in Queensland which voted no. All the rest voted yes. Brisbane, inner city, 79.5%. Sydney, New South Wales, 83.7%. Adelaide, 70%. Melbourne, 83.7%. So again, you see that proximity to the centre of the city, and that's to do with changing. Once upon a time, the inner city suburbs of Australia were remorselessly working class. Nowadays, you see a much more of a, what the sociologists call the knowledge elite living in the inner city. You see a high green vote, a high university educated. And there's a whole different sociological values between sort of people who live in inner city and people who want to live in larger houses in outer parts of the city. You're seeing some of that reflected in these figures.
Yep, and
it's a cultural value rather than a class value, which normally defines Australian politics.
Sure, and let's just recap on another figure, which again we moved over very quickly at the outset, Anthony. That was participation. What did you discover as you look at those numbers? They're age-based breakdowns. That would conform, wouldn't it? Some of those numbers we're now showing the audience would conform with your hunch about turnout?
Yeah, that is exactly the pattern of age-based voting you see under voluntary voting everywhere around the world. It's uniformly high here compared to everywhere else in the world in this vote. This vote was conducted over several weeks. So the turnout rate is 79.5 when people compare it with the British Brexit referendum or the Irish referendum. It is higher than those, but you'd also have to say 2 things. 1, Australians are used to voting, and 2, this was conducted over several weeks.
Now, this would be unique, though, wouldn't it, Anthony? Because on the electoral roll, we don't get these kind of age breakdowns. Is that correct?
No, we do. They do actually publish statistics of who voted by age after general elections, but because of compulsory voting, there's not much difference from age group to age group. Is that the turnout rate is usually in the mid-80s for under 25s, and it's in the low 90s for everybody else. So that's the standard thing. With younger age groups, it's an issue usually of whether they're on the roll or not. We've moved to automatic electoral enrolment in recent years, and the quality of the roll has improved, and we're getting more younger people on the roll than we used to. And this vote, as we saw with the huge enrolment at the start of the campaign, younger people were getting on the roll. It's been quite a boost to youth enrolment across the country, the conduct of this poll. So we don't have a breakdown of age in support of the yes and no. This was still a secret ballot. The age profiles, the turnout rates are done on the basis of who returned the envelope. It's not done on the basis of then working out yes and no. But we know from all the surveys that yes vote was highest amongst younger voters and lowest amongst older voters. And so you'd expect if everybody voted, the yes vote would be slightly higher, but it wouldn't be significantly higher.
Fair enough. And just finally, one without notice, Bennelong, Anthony, it does just happen to have a by-election coming up, but I take it from everything you've told us so far that this need have no particular significance, today's result in Bennelong, to party political voting intentions at that by-election.
Yes, Bennelong and Banks, which were 2 of the seats which were Liberal held and voted no in Sydney, are probably, I think, pretty sure the two Liberal electorates, the highest proportion of people born in non-English speaking countries. And so again, you're seeing a cleavage there, which is on those sorts of cultural origin issues rather than sort of political debate. Now we're in the election campaign. It suggests that running a campaign based on same-sex marriage for the by-election is probably not going to do the Labor Party any good in a seat like Bennelong. It's an electorate where you can tap into anti-same-sex support in parts of that electorate. So I don't think we'll hear much about this plebiscite in the run-up to the by-election. Of course, the bill is going to go through, and of course, John Alexander's not going to be there to vote on it, so it may be slightly neutral in terms of the by-election result.
Yeah, exactly. And the by-election will probably be run and won largely around, or just around the time that Parliament's dealt with it anyway. So, Anthony Green, we'll let you go and pore over some of those numbers. Interesting, though, for your first blush analysis. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.